Good afternoon, it's Dr. Greg Emerson coming from a unusually cold and rainy Northern Rivers area of northern New South Wales. And with this crazy lockdown we're having, it's kind of been a little difficult to get out and find people to do podcasts with. So today, and for a while in the future, it might just be me for a while, talking about things that I'm interested in, talking about things that I'm doing in some of the latest medical research and cryptocurrency news. So let's get started. Sitting here with my Native American buffalo coffee mug. I got my All Blacks hat on. I got my Special Forces outdoors sweater. I've got my yoga pants. I've got all my medical research. I've always been so confused about who I am, but now I don't care. Realised I'm this crazy conglomerate of all those people, and very happy to be so. Oh, you're probably going to ask why I'm sitting here in front of my computer without my blue light blocking glasses on. Good question. The answer is, it's always important to remember that blue light is not harmful. It's around midday now, so the vast predominance of the light spectrum is blue at the moment rather than red, and blue light is good for me. Blue light wakes me up because it's midday. I want to be awake and alert and out hunter-gathering and doing the stuff that men should be doing. What I don't want though is isolated blue light. I particularly don't want isolated blue light after it gets dark. So at the moment, the blue light from the computer is being incorporated into the full light spectrum because I'm outdoors, and that full light spectrum at the moment, as I said, because the midday has a lot of blue in it. But tonight at 7-8 o'clock at night, when it's dark, when I'm not meant to be exposed to any blue light at all, I don't want to be sitting in front of my computer screen looking at that screen, which is blue light. So it's isolated blue light at the wrong period of time, which is the problem. Right, so what do I want to talk about? I started watching the first of the Michael Jordan The Last Dance series last night. And I'm going to talk about that during some of these podcasts because having been a professional basketball player and having followed the Bulls in the 90s, it's fascinating to watch and learn and get some lessons from somebody who was an absolutely extraordinary athlete. So the first thing that I as soon as the documentary started, one of the first things he said was there was this debate about who was responsible for the success of that 90s Bulls team. And, Jordan said, because he was getting there was a big push to say that it was the management which was responsible for the success of that team. And Jordan said, if you're not wearing a uniform and you're not on the court, you don't get to dictate what happens to this team, because management after their success were looking at rebuilding, and Jordan was kind of offended that management were pulling the team apart before it was ready to be pulled apart. And he felt like if you weren't riding in the saddle, as Theodore Roosevelt used to say, if you weren't on the court wearing a uniform, you didn't get the opportunity to be able to dictate when that team finished its run. And I think there's a lot of that in the world today at the moment, that you're getting people who are no longer in the saddle, who are no longer riding in the saddle, or who have never ridden the saddle dictating health and how we should live our lives. So I think it's very important for me that I always get advice from people who have lived the life and got the results that I'm trying to get. Of course, Jerry Krause, who at that stage was the general manager, not the owner, but the general manager of the team, he felt completely different. Felt that he was, and the management team was responsible for the success of that team. And he said management win games, not the players. And again, I think that I would disagree with that. If you're talking about who wins the games, it's the players who win the games, the people in the saddle. It's Theodore Roosevelt who led the Rough Riders during the Spanish War, having had moved from politics out to owning a ranch in the Badlands of Dakota. I'm okay with that guy giving me instructions because he's living the life and he's been there, done that. The next interesting thing that I found really interesting about the documentary was when Jordan got drafted initially from being a North Carolina player, very successful North Carolina player, into the NBA, he wasn't actually first pick in that NBA draft that year. He was actually the third pick because other management were being very selective about who they needed in their team. And when Jordan got into the Bulls were far from successful. In fact, the local indoor soccer team, they said, was drawing a bigger crowd than the Bulls to some of their games. And one of the really interesting things that Jordan said, he said, was that on the first day of practice, my mentality was, whoever is the leader on this team, I'm going after him. And I'm not going to do it with my voice, because I had no voice. I had no status. I had to do it with the way I played. Again, just a reminder of me that if I want to have a voice in the world about health and wellness and perhaps the way the world is going, then I better be embodying what I'm talking about. I want my voice to be about the results that I'm getting and the way I'm living my life, not just as a writer or as an author or somebody on social media. I want my life to be full of integrity, that I am portraying in what I'm writing and what I'm doing as being truly part of who I am. Next interesting quote was, he says, what happened was, in the third game of his season, the team was down by 9 points. And he said, starting the fourth quarter, and the team had already resigned to losing the game and were thinking about the next one. So the Bulls down 9 points, starting the fourth quarter, they've all checked out. They've said, well, we've lost this game, we're used to losing, let's just go on and start thinking about the next game that we're going to be playing. Jordan was like, whoa, you can't do that. This game's not lost yet. And the coach looked at him and said to the other players, to this guy who was a rookie in his third game of the season, said, get the ball to him. Of course they did. Jordan got the ball and they ended up winning that game. That was really the birth of the dynasty that the Chicago Bulls became. And I find that really fascinating lesson in never giving up. Now, another example of never giving up, and a really good example of never giving up, was the recent UFC fight between Tony Ferguson and Justin Gaethje. Because never giving up doesn't necessarily mean keep doing exactly the same thing that you were doing before. Because if it's not working, you might have to make some changes. So of course, Tony Ferguson, undefeated in I think 9 years, is now fighting Justin Gaethje. But he wasn't meant to fight Justin Gaethje. Justin Gaethje was a stand-up fighter. He was basically used, his fists and his legs to kick and punch. He didn't rely on his wrestling or jiu-jitsu skills. Ferguson is an all-round fighter. He can do it all. But he was training to fight Khabib, who is a wrestling specialist. Very late in the piece, partly because of the virus border problems and lockdowns, they had to change his opponent and he had to fight Gaethje. And I think Ferguson went in it being confident that he could cope with the stand-up game of Gaethje. But come the fifth round, it was a horrendous fight for Ferguson, and he got really damaged in that fight. And he's one of those fighters who, like the Spartans, says, don't stop the fight, I'll go out on my shield. Well, you don't necessarily want to go out on your shield. It'd be nice to live to fight another day, nice to be successful. So sometimes, and it's wonderful that his mantra is, I'll never give up. But it was also a great example of, yes, you can never give up, but you can also change the strategy to try and be successful. Never giving up doesn't mean that you're sacrificing success for the sake of it. Never giving up means I will use everything, every strategy, every tool, every person, every level of expertise to give me the tools and the motivation to finally be successful. I did that the other day, actually. Actually, I kind of had to do that the other day. I have a movie club I've been involved in which every week we get online and we get assigned a movie to watch, and then we give our review. And I have a fairly standard movie taste, and the movie for this week was chosen. It was called Hedwig, and can't even remember it now. That's how meaningful it was for me. Hedwig in the Final Inch, the Last Inch or something, I can't remember. But it was so not my kind of movie. I have no problem with the people who chose it. I mean, that's the amazing thing about this world, the variety of tastes, and we can still have a variety of tastes and beliefs and still get on with each other and allow that, as long as we don't hurt each other, the mantra of the anarcho-capitalist, you know, we should be able to live our lives as long as we don't hurt anybody else, have done to us as we do to others. And I only got halfway through the movie. So people say, oh, Greg, you gave up. Well, no, I didn't give up. If I'd given up to me would be giving up on movies. But I just felt that I was getting nothing out of the movie, and I would change strategy and stop that one halfway through and live another day to watch another movie rather than completely ruin my movie-going experience. All right. Let's have a look at some of the recent medical research, because there's fascinating medical research coming out at the moment. So what do I want to talk about? Let's have a look at, let's start off with our teeth. That's a good idea, because there's an article out recently about bacteria in our mouths, and we're finding that the bacteria in our mouths are very, very structured. They live in colonies where each species lives by itself. Isolated like a tribal system. Even bacteria are tribal, but those bacteria produce a biofilm, a protective layer of mucus, if you like, which protects them from attack. And it's that biofilm which is a big part of protecting those bacteria, allowing them to overgrow when they start causing cavities, when they're allowed to overgrow by insufficient, poor cleaning strategies and poor dietary choices. And it's that biofilm that you can feel on your tongue in the morning when you came up, and it's kind of covered in slime, which is why the ancient Ayurvedic practice of tongue scraping with a copper tongue scraper is now coming back into an awareness, because what it does is it removes that layer of biofilm. Otherwise, we slowly, when we get up over the next hour or so, absorb that mucousy biofilm layer, which is full of all the toxic waste excreted by the bacteria overnight. So for me, initiating a tongue scraping regime has been really important for my health. But let me read you a little bit about this article. It says, quote, the bacteria that cause tooth decay protect themselves by hiding in a multi-layered community of other bacteria. So if you map them out, they're living in tribes on our tongue and in our mouth. They discovered that S. mutans, which is the main bacteria, which is usually associated with dental decay, most often appeared arranged in a mound against the tooth surface. So this bacteria collects as a tribe and sits on our tooth and starts to erode away at it. It formed an inner core with other commensal bacteria, such as Strep oralis, forming additional outer layers precisely arranged in a crown-like structure. They talk about it as a corona structure. We've all had enough of hearing about corona structures, but it seems like bacteria in our mouth do the same thing. Supporting and operating these layers was an extracellular scaffold, that's the biofilm, made of sugars produced by S. mutans, effectively encasing and protecting the disease-causing bacteria. What we discovered, and what was exciting for us, is that the rotund areas of bacteria, that's a good word, perfectly matched with the demineralized and high acid levels on the enamel surface. So it appears it is mounds of those bacteria covered in biofilm, which is causing the dental decay that we suffer from. In a final set of experiments, the team put the rotund community to the test, applying an antimicrobial treatment and observing how the bacteria fared. When the rotund structures were intact, the S. mutans in the inner core largely avoided dying from the antimicrobial treatment, only breaking up the scaffolding material, holding the outer layers together, enabled the antimicrobial to penetrate and effectively kill the cavity-causing bacteria. I.e., if we're not getting rid of the biofilm first. If we're not getting rid of the force field, we're not going to be able to kill the bacteria which is causing the disease. So for me, that's why an oral regime now must encompass a biofilm strategy, a tongue scraping strategy, a surfactant strategy which helps melt away that biofilm force field, and a strategy to kill these bacteria. Well, not perhaps kill them, but knock them down into, like viruses in our body. We're full of these microbes, but then keep them manageable. We live in this harmonious relationship with these microbes as long as we don't let them start to take control. So again, it's about keeping these levels down, these organisms down to healthy levels. And at the moment, with our diet and the way we look after our teeth, I think what we're seeing is biofilms accumulating and these bacteria starting to take over rather than be held in check. So tongue scraping, some surfactants, and some antimicrobial components to the cleaning regime is really important. Let's keep going. What have we got next? We have got low testosterone levels could be the reason more men are dying of the current virus that we're dealing with than women. What does the article say? New research suggests men with low testosterone levels who contract this virus, which I'm not going to say, you know what I mean, are more likely to die from the virus. Scientists in Germany have been looking at why global death figures indicate men are more likely to die as a result of this virus than women, and the role testosterone, the male sex hormone, which helps to monitor the body's immune response, plays in this, is coming under the microscope. So it does appear that men with low testosterone, and that fits with the patterns of people who are dying of this illness, appears to be the very elderly and occasionally the very young, seems to be the preponderance of deaths from this virus. And it appears, for reasons unknown yet, perhaps probably we would think something to do with testosterone and its role in the immune system, to cause an increased mortality. So what's the lesson from that? Well, men should be trying to keep their testosterone up as much as they can, and we should be trying to do that naturally. What are the best ways to keeping testosterone up? Well, we've got to keep our belly fat low, because belly fat contains the enzyme aromatase, which converts testosterone to estrogen. So men are less likely to want to go out for a run, but more likely to sit on a couch, because testosterone gives us our energy and our dynamism. So keeping the belly fat low is very important. Secondly, we know that sunlight on the testicles is a very effective way at boosting our testosterone levels. It's only, in recent hominid evolution that we've had to cover everything up. So it's a good idea in private to try and get outside and get the testicles in the sunlight. Just don't get burned. Just it is, and I've talked about this in lots of podcasts recently, how important it is for a woman to get outside and get the vagina in the sunlight, because we know that the sunlight, both for the gut and therefore for the vagina, is very important for microbiome diversity. That's perhaps the best thing that we can do for our microbiomes, is get our abdomens and our abdomens in a woman's vagina out in the sunlight, because that helps establish the microbiome diversity. And we know for women that the more diverse and more healthy the vaginal microbiome, the much less chance they have of getting cervical cancer, independent of vitamin D levels. So men should keep their belly fat low by exercise and good diet. We should try and get our testicles out in the sunlight in private without getting them burned. Those are probably the two big ones. I think that a diet high in cruciferous vegetables is very good, because cruciferous vegetables help inhibit the conversion of testosterone to estrogen. And boron, I take 3 to 6 milligrams of boron per day, because I think the data is pretty good on boron being very effective, not only for arthritis, but in maintaining levels of testosterone. So testosterone is going to help us with our immune system. Right, what's next? Melatonin. Ooh, how often do I talk about melatonin? At least 9 benefits that we get from melatonin. But of course the question is, should we be getting our melatonin from a bottle, or should we be trying to maximize our own? Of course, melatonin has become incredibly popular now as a supplement, and it's a hormone, so we have to be very careful about that. And the key thing to remember is that, we make a very, very small amount of melatonin, about 0.2 milligrams, which puts us to sleep at night, but has multiple other factors in the body, including killing embryonic cancer cells and protecting our stem cells and rejuvenating our mitochondria. We know that 95% of chronic degenerative disease has mitochondrial disorder as its base, then that behooves us to therefore protect our mitochondria with our melatonin. The big debate is, should we do that by taking a melatonin supplement, or should we try to maximize our own production? And how do we maximize our own production? Well, we see the sunrise in the morning, as I always talk about, and we make sure we don't switch our production off. Melatonin is produced in the pineal gland, and we switch that melatonin off by exposing ourselves to blue light, isolated blue light, after it gets dark at night. Of course, what we do then is we get rid of our melatonin and we can't finally sleep, and so we go and take a melatonin supplement. The question is there any risks in doing that? And this review article, says, more worrisome is the lack of strict regulation of melatonin products. A 2017 study tested 31 different melatonin supplements, sun and rain, and found that most of the supplements did not have the same amount of melatonin listed on their labels. In addition, 26% of the supplements contain serotonin, a hormone that can have harmful effects even at relatively low levels. They go on to say, we don't have evidence as to whether taking artificial melatonin will suppress the body's own production of melatonin. At least one study has indicated that this was not true among adults, but it does not appear to have been studied in children. Well, it's common sense to me. I don't know any other hormone in the body which, when you take a supplement, doesn't shut down your own production. Doesn't matter if it's cortisol, doesn't matter if it's thyroid hormone, estrogen, testosterone. You supplement with greater amounts than you make, and you shut down your own production. So I'm going to presume taking a melatonin supplement, if you can hear me, is going to suppress our own production. We'll take a break, come back to part 2 after the rain. Right, well, the rain stopped. I have absolutely no idea where we were. I think we're talking about melatonin and how taking melatonin supplements will almost certainly reduce our own production of melatonin. And we're prescribing levels which are much higher than we would normally produce naturally. So I think that we don't fully know the implications of that, but it worries me, because there's the human, every body, it doesn't matter if you're a plant or an animal, maintains a balance for a reason. And we usually have ways of addressing that balance, because the body does not want to be imbalanced. If we take too much water, we pee it out. If we eat too much food, it gets redistributed around our wastes. If you take too much vitamin C, it goes out in your urine. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because vitamin C in the urine has been shown to reduce your risk of bladder cancer. But the body likes to maintain a balance. And so if it's getting delivered large amounts of substances that it always produces, it's not going to produce some of its own. And I think that when we're taking far too much of a hormone, historically that's never been a good thing, whether that be thyroid hormone or testosterone. We don't want to take more than we produce naturally, nor do we want to take something. Our goal for our health should be to try and maintain the production of our own hormone systems. Right, let's keep going. What are we up to? We're up to vitamin D, the effects of vitamin D on metabolic profiles in women with polycystic ovary syndrome. What do we find? Quote, a total of 10 studies were selected for this review. We found that vitamin D supplementation had a significant effect on insulin metabolism, total serum testosterone, hirsutism, C-reactive protein, and total antioxidant capacity in women with polycystic ovary syndrome. Evidence from available randomized controlled trials suggests that patients with polycystic ovary syndrome should take vitamin D supplementation for the beneficial effect of metabolic profiles. I say good work, but let's get our vitamin D from the sun because it's free. And also vitamin D, if you're low in vitamin D, it's because you're deficient in sunlight, and there are benefits from the sunlight which go way beyond vitamin D, which is why I try and get all my vitamin D from sun exposure without getting burnt. I try and maintain a healthy tan all year round, but very important. So now we know that another reason for women to get out in the sun, not only is it good for their vaginal microbiome, but it gives them the vitamin D to help them prevent getting polycystic ovary syndrome. And I did a podcast recently about women in polycystic ovary syndrome, where the primary problem is that damage to the outside wall of the ovary caused by high levels of insulin, but it's good to see that sunlight can help mitigate that. Okay, so take-home message from that study was one of the ways that women can help reduce the risk of polycystic ovary and mitigate the effects if they've got it is get some vitamin D. What's next? Another one on vitamin D. Lungs is a target of the current virus infection. Protective mechanisms of vitamin D and melatonin as a new potential synergistic treatment. Quote, the viral pandemic has a high mortality rate and is affecting practically the entire world population. The leading cause of death is severe acute respiratory syndrome as a consequence of exacerbated inflammatory response accompanied by uncontrolled oxidative stress as well as the inflammatory reaction at the lung level. What that's saying is that this virus is primarily a respiratory virus and ruins your health by attacking your lungs. Vitamin D and melatonin could be good options for achieving this aim, taking into account that they have many shared underlying mechanisms that are able to modulate and control the immune adequately and oxidative response against the virus, possibly even through a synergistic interaction. Hello, what's the good news? Good news are both are free. We make our melatonin, we just have to make sure we stimulate it by the sunrise in the morning and make sure we don't switch it off at night by exposing ourselves to isolated blue light. And vitamin D, also free because it's out in the sun. What about if you live in a place which is always cloudy like this? Well, when it's not cloudy, over summer, get as much vitamin D as you can because it's a fat-soluble nutrient which you can store for winter, like a chipmunk stores acorns. Another vitamin D one. It's hard, I can't keep up with the vitamin D research. It's so profound and so meaningful and so impactful. Serum vitamin D level and carotid intima media thickness. What do they find? Our findings show that the vitamin D levels are inversely associated with the thickness of the carotid intima. So the carotid intima is the inside layer of our arteries. The thicker that becomes, the less room there is to pump blood through our arteries, so our blood pressure goes up and we're much more likely to get a blood clot, because what happens is that our platelets are our first line of defense against blood clotting, and the way the blood circulates through the blood vessels is it spins basically the platelets to the outside wall, or to the wall of the blood vessel, where they're on patrol looking for breaks and cracks to block up if there's any bleeding going on. And so when that wall gets thickened and irregular, it's much more likely that platelets are going to think there's a leak and start forming a blood clot, which then leads to a heart attack or a stroke. So we don't want high blood pressure, we don't want high heart attacks, we don't want strokes. So important is to try and keep our blood vessels as soft and supple and as patent as possible. We want soft, floppy arteries and hard, rigid bones. And it looks like vitamin D, as well as helping us with our bone structure, also helps keeping our arteries soft, supple and patent. So another reason to get outside in the sun without getting burnt. I think this will be the last one for today. What do we got? We have got photobiomodulation restores spermatogenesis in the transient scrotal hypothermia induced mice. What does that mean? Translates, That means that light therapy on the testicles helps restore sperm levels. So we're in an epidemic of dropping sperm levels in the male population, as well as dropping testosterone levels. I think the data is the average 40-year-old man has half the testosterone that his 40-year-old father had, and half the sperm count. So again, another reason that almost certainly getting the testicles out in the sunlight is going to be good for sperm production. All right, and finally there's three big articles about electromagnetic fields and disruption to the calcium flow into mitochondria. I think I'll leave that for next time because it's quite a detailed description. Anything else in the news? Well, also interested in what's happening with world finances, with the recent admission by the US Federal Reserve Chairman that they're going to be printing as much money as they need to. And of course, the problem with printing money is the inevitable inflation that occurs. They've only really got two strategies to control monetary policy: to reduce interest rates, and we can't do that anymore, or to print money. And so that appears to be the strategy at the moment, which is going to lead to hyperinflation, which is why I think that assets which are independent of monetary policy and hyperinflation are a good idea, and that appears to be precious metals and cryptocurrencies. I write about that a lot on my Patreon page, so if you're interested in anything I've talked about today, I go into much greater depth on my Patreon page on all of those things. So if you're watching this on YouTube, be pleased if you liked it, if you did like it, of course, and subscribe to the channel. If you're listening to this on a podcast, if you think this is good content that you like, make sure you give it a good review. That helps getting this information disseminated. And if you'd like to have personal contact with me and get this information in much more detail and about how I'm incorporated in my life to stay in optimal health, there's my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/Dr. Greg Emerson. Thanks a lot for your time today, and thanks for listening.